Welcome back. Today we're continuing the build of the bookcase. Today is the turn of the internal shelves and the back panel, then we can get this thing mounted on the wall. If that sounds interesting, stick around. The main frame is now completed. I've put all the internal partitions in place and now I want to look at these middle and bottom shelves. It's a similar sort of process. We're going to measure, we're going to cut the dovetails, we're going to fit it into place. The only difference this time I think is the order that we do things in and how we take those measurements. Now I know we're square because we checked that when we did the glue up, but I don't actually know if all these internal panels are yet parallel. So we'll measure that and see how we did. I'm just going to measure the internal diameter of each panel. The top here, internal, and the bottom here, internal. And I'm looking for those two distances to be more or less equal. If it is, it makes the measuring of these panels a lot easier because that will be the same measure because I know that those two panels are going to be parallel. If I have any variation, for example, if the top is wider than the bottom, then this panel has to be a little bit wider than this panel, and that's going to give us all sorts of problems. We can allow for that as we fit the shelves, but it's better if things are parallel. So let's see how we get on. Panel A, panel B, panel C and panel D. Now you may notice that in this back corner here I've put a cutout on my bookcase. That cutout is to allow for the box in the back corner of my workshop that's just concealing a vent from the house. And all we'll do, we'll position the cupboard and the bookcase around that, and then we'll clad inside the cupboard to make it look pretty. Let's measure up for parallel. Looking at cupboard A, my internal measurement at the top is 473.5 millimeters. At the base, my measurement is 470, wow, 3.5. So they are bang on to the ½ millimeter. Happy with that one. Panel B. At the top here it's 637 and at the base it's 637. So that's bang on. Panel C, 636 and at the base 636. So that's bang on. And finally on panel D, 473 and at the bottom 473. So we're in pretty good shape because we took all that time to lay the thing out, make sure it was all accurate. We dialed it in with the Incra fence, it was all nice and square. We've now made our next part of the job relatively easy. Now we know that all these panels are nice and parallel, I can take the measurements from this base point here and I will use the same measurements at this middle point here. If you're finding you've got variance in your panels, do these one at a time. Cut the bottom one, fit it, measure the second one, cut the second one, fit it. And by fit it I mean cut the dovetail joints in. Now that means you're going to be continually shifting between your MFT and your CMS, but you'll get the results that you need. If these are square and parallel, you can take the measurements here and we can batch these panels out, then we can batch the dovetails, then we can assemble it. So it makes the life an awful lot easier. The measurement we need goes from the inside of the dovetail to the inside of the dovetail, not from the inside of the panel, otherwise it will be too small. And that's giving me a measurement of 647.5. Mark that down, 647.5. I'll now measure out panel B in the same way. Panel B is coming in at 647.5. Panel A is coming in at 485 minus, and what the minus means is it's just ever so slightly, probably about 2,000 millimeter under 485. So when I cut that, I'll just cut it on the shy side of 485 and that will then fit. And panel D is 485 as well. if anything, 485 plus, meaning it's slightly on the proud side of 485, but not enough to worry about. To cut these, we use a combination of the Incra fence, a series of dogs at the back of the panel here to hold things nice and square on my MFT, and obviously the MFT track saw on the TS55. I've already given myself a reference cut on this panel, really quite simple. I chose a reference edge and I've marked that here with a symbol, and I then squared this off using the track saw, the TS55 and the dogs on the MFT, so this is now a nice square edge. So I can now batch out all these cuts. I'll do 2 panel A's, 2 panel B's, 2 panel C's and 2 panel D's, then we'll come back in and do the dovetails. I've zeroed in my Incra fence, so my first cut is 485 and I can take that measurement directly from my Incra scale. 485. Just going to fine tune that because I wanted, on panel A, I wanted 485 minus, so I'm just going to take that in just a couple of thou below 485, and now I can make 2 cuts at this. Everything's cut to length, everything's ripped down to 250 millimeters in width, and everything is marked up so I know where all the pieces fit. Next job is to cut the dovetails on the end of the panels. So I've already measured the depth of these, comes out at around about 5.9 millimeters, and I've set a depth of cut on the router table using the same 17 millimeter bit that we did in the last video, and I've set that for around about 5.6 millimeters. I'm going to use the same method. I'll cut it so it's short and we'll creep up on the joint to get to the perfect depth. I've done a nominal 0.2 millimeters on either side of the panels at the moment, and that's again so we can creep up to the final width. So we'll now cut a test piece at the router table to get that tuned in, and then we can batch all these out and get them fitted to the panel. So the depth is actually a little bit too long, and as we suspected, it's too wide. I'm going to do another test cut on this end, but I'm going to actually lower the router bit down a little bit. And that looks pretty good now. I now want to move the fence back a little bit to work on that width. And I'll just use the incremental adjuster. I'm now taking 0.9 millimeters off each side. And that's good. So that's going in with hand tightness, and it's self-supporting, and that's what we're looking for. So that took a bit of fettling. It's now 0.8 millimeters taken off each side, and whatever that depth is. So we've now got the router table tuned in. So with that done, I can now go ahead and put the joints on all of these, turn this over so I work from the front, and we can get this thing glued and assembled. So there we go, we now have a frame assembled. All the base panels are in, all the middle panels are in. And what I want you to realise is how neat and tidy all these shelves are. Everything's lined up perfectly, all the joints are nice and tight. And that's because we took so much time and care when we were lining up those cuts for the dovetails. If we hadn't sort of focused on that, you would start to see discrepancies in these lines, and that really shows up on your finished joinery. And if you take your time to get the foundations right, the frame comes together correctly, and when we do the finishing carpentry on this, such as the drawer fronts and the doors, all that will line up as well. Now that's the difference between something that looks like a quality construction and something that doesn't look quite so good in terms of quality. So I'm really pleased with this. So the next step is I want to look at the back. It's just tongue and groove panel, so it's not very hard. But I'll turn this over and then we'll quickly put the back together before we put it on the back wall. So first job, just take some measurements. That's coming in at 1192 millimeters. The center here we have 1191 millimeters, and at the far end we have 1192 millimeters. So there's less than a millimeter discrepancy across this, which is pretty good. So we're going to cut all our boards at 1191 millimeters, and that'll look good. This is the board that we're using, the tongue and groove, and this is got a front face of 11 millimeters. So 230 divided by 11 equals 21. So I'm going to cut 21 pieces of this at, so that's 1191 length, and then we can get this back fitted into position. So the saw's all set up now. I'm setting my stop to that 1191 mark, which is there. And now I just batch out 21 of these little beasts. We'll cut the first one and then we will just check it ourselves for length. The length looks good, so I'll start to batch these out. Now remember, we're going to drop some power sockets in the back of this, so we've got those power sockets there, and that's going to come in halfway across this cupboard area here. So I'll start in the middle and start to lay these out, and when I get to a point of where I think the power socket is going to be, we'll come back in and we'll look at how we're going to make that piece of joinery. So I'm now at the point where I want to drop in the back box, so not drop the back box in, but allow for that in the final assembly. I know I want it to be about 270 millimeters in from the edge, and this is now looking pretty good to go into that sort of position. And I know I want it above this shelf here, so somewhere around about there is good. So the way I'm going to do this is really simple. We're going to make this easy on ourselves. I'm going to cut a piece of wood here that takes me up to that point, and then cut a piece of wood that takes me beyond that. And then once we've finished cutting all the pieces, we will route a small reveal into this edge here to give me the overall size of the box. And then we'll do the same for that end, and then we'll just make sure that we route a small reveal on the panels either side of the back box so that fits in perfectly, and that just makes life a little bit easier for us. So gonna go about there 20, maybe a bit higher. So we'll make that 270. So I'll cut two pieces at 270, and then we'll measure in the top piece. That's it, that's everything now cut to length. We've got a bit of trimming to do at the ends, and we've got some joinery to do to just fit the back boxes for the sockets, but that's pretty good to go. Next job is I'm going to find the centre of the cabinet, find the centre panel, which is this one, and I've marked it, and we'll line that centre up, and then we'll put this one in position, and then we'll work out from this one, tacking these out as we go until we get to the joinery position for the sockets, and then the final trim at the end. I've got the centre of my panel and I've got the centre of my board, and all I'm doing is just making sure that the first panel here, the first backboard, is square to my frame, and when it is, I just put a couple of tacks in here. Once we've got the first one lined up, we can then drop the second one in. And then I work along the panel until I get to the point where I need to trim the back to allow for the sockets. I'm now at the point where I want to just drop in the back box. So the pieces outside are not tacked in, they're just laid loosely, and I've lined the hole up in the middle so that's the right fit for my back box. Simply resting the back box into place, and then I can make a mark for the outside edges of the back box on the outside panels, like so. And then that line there simply extends across there. So I need to cut out those two areas here. Easiest way of doing that is actually on the router table. So we'll set the router table up and we'll just nibble out these two areas, and then we can tack these into position. I've dropped a straight cut bit into the router table, and I've taken this measurement here and transferred it to my set square. Finding the widest part of the cutter, I can now bring my fence in and set it to that depth. And I just want to define the areas I need to cut a bit better. So I'm just going to put those into place. And now I can start the router and carefully lower this into position and slide it along to that end, and that will give me the cutout that we are looking for. And there you have it, a nice inset box that will do the job nicely. So we can now tack these into position. Heavy, it's very heavy now. So there you go, that's pretty much it for this episode. There's our assembly, the back's on, it's all nice, it's all square, everything's lined up perfectly. Really pleased with that. It's very heavy now, very, very heavy now, and also incredibly sturdy, and we want that because we're in a workshop environment, of course. Next job is I'll clean off the back wall, drop off the electrics so we can fit them into this unit. I'm just going to take some of the cladding off the side walls of the workshop. Because that's so heavy now, I need just a bit of flex to make it easier to fit, and then I can re-clad that in, and then I'll put it into position. I'll give it a bit of a sand before I do all that, so when we come back together, this beast will be on the back wall and we'll be talking about either the doors or the drawers. Not decided yet, living on the edge. See you next time.